Hey now, what would you do if someone was coming to take away the things that you worked hard to accumulate in your lifetime? Well, if you're a business owner, this is something you should be thinking about. And what if you're planning for your retirement and you're counting on government assistance in your retirement, like, for example, I don't know, Medicaid, but you're going to be taking home too much money, or somebody may tell you have too many assets. Many of you haven't even thought about this. Well, you should be thinking about it right now, whether you're 35, 55, or 75. And that's what we're going to talk about today. That and so much more. My guest today is Stephanie Sexauer, and she answers these questions for her clients, and she's going to answer them for us today. She's a trust and estates lawyer and the attorney and founder of Sexauer Law. So please join us in welcoming Stephanie to the Inside BS Show. Stephanie, thanks for joining us. It's great to have you here today.
Hey, Dave. Thank you so much for having me.
All right, so tell us how you got into trust and estates in the first place. Tell us your story.
Sure. Well, I'm an Illinois attorney. I grew up in the Chicago suburbs, and as is kind of typical in this area, we all kind of grow up around here and stay around here. Went to college down at U of I in Champaign, back to law school in the city. But, in thinking, growing up knowing I wanted to be a lawyer, I didn't know exactly what type. I knew I wanted to be in a courtroom, at least sometimes. But I also just had always had this really soft spot for seniors. My grandma had lived with us growing up, so my parents both worked and a lot. So she really raised me and my three siblings to a large extent. So I was so lucky when I graduated from law school to find my first job, and it happened to be at a firm that did a lot of probate. And so for people who don't know, probate is the legal process where when someone passes away, their estate needs to go through probate in order for assets to pass to that person's family. So, in Illinois where I work, that legal threshold is someone who owns real estate or has over $100,000 of assets that are not jointly owned or named a beneficiary. So it applies to a lot more people than you'd think. And as part of probate, there are other types of estates that you might open. One might be adult guardianship, one might be minor guardianship, all within the realm of probate. So I'm very, very lucky to have found this. And I really do enjoy the work.
Okay, so you mentioned your grandma. You mentioned that that she had a big influence on you, and on your website, and on your LinkedIn page, and in a number of different publications, I think that where you've been interviewed or you've written, you talk about elder law. Explain to folks what elder law actually is, because we hear a lot about it, and everybody kind of nods their head. Oh yeah, elder law. But I don't know that people really know what elder law is. So educate us, help us understand what elder law is.
Sure. Well, interestingly, I think that this is a term, kind of a legal term of art, that it encompasses a number of different factual scenarios or solutions that all kind of together mean elder law, but it's comprised of many different practice areas. One is the idea of adult guardianship, which is, again, a probate proceeding where someone who's over the age of 18 would need someone else to make legal decisions for them. And that could be because they were a person of typical cognition and then aged into a disability like dementia or Alzheimer's. It could be someone who, like you and me, was just roaming around their regular everyday lives, were hit by a car and ended up in a coma. Or it could be someone who from the get-go had some type of disability that rendered them, when they turned 18, unable to make decisions. Somebody like, someone who has Down syndrome or really severe autism, someone who even, we knew the day they turned 18 wouldn't be able to make competent legal decisions for themselves. So that's the type of elder law that I regularly practice, and it's really kind of my love in the law. It's where you're really helping families through a moment that they otherwise legally can't get through without the assistance of attorneys and social workers and case management and judges. And through that, you can accomplish a lot. Whether it's rescinding a contract that someone should never have entered into, whether it's recovering assets after really serious financial exploitation, whether it's, selling businesses, selling property. All of that can happen in adult guardianship, and it's really, again, fulfilling work.
Okay, so some of the scenarios you played out, I think it makes sense to have that plan in place well before you need it. So people who are in their 30s or their 40s or definitely in their 50s, they should be thinking about those types of things in advance. And I know that trust and estates attorneys, when you go to them, will talk about the different types of documents that people need to have in order for all different scenarios. Most people think of trust and estates and they think of a will, right? And we know that a will is an important thing because you want your assets to go to your heirs and you want to spare them the expense and the time delay of going through the probate process. What else, Stephanie, besides a will, should somebody have in place? Like, a family, a couple who just got married, or maybe they're having a baby, right? Whenever people have life events, like I'm the Grim Reaper in our family. So when somebody has a life event, I'm like, oh, you got to go see the attorney. You got to update your will. Oh, you got to go see the attorney. You got to get a trust. Oh, you got to go see the attorney. Time for a healthcare proxy. We got a pandemic going on. So what types of documents should people have? And let's just do it very vanilla. It's a new couple. They just got married. Life is great for them. They're so happy. Now is the time when they got to think about their death. So they come to Stephanie, and what are you going to recommend for them?
Sure. Well, again, Dave, this is so morbid, and people in the prime of their lives do not want to talk to me. The most natural time someone does come to me is when they've had that first baby. That's when they're finally thinking to themselves, God, what would happen if we weren't around to raise this baby? And so, it's true.
Airplane flights, Stephanie, everybody before they get out, they're in line waiting for security at the airport, and they look at each other. I know my wife and I did this, and they're like, well, what would happen to the kids if this plane goes down?
Right. And a lot of people will even fly separately because that thought just terrifies them to such a great extent that they don't want to physically travel together.
All right, so what documents do we need? What do we have to have in place?
Yeah, there are 4 separate documents that I think make up the crux of a really good estate plan. One is a will, which is the place for those young parents where they will talk about guardianship for the kids. They'll decide who has the care and custody of the kids. You can include a lot of customizations on things like, well, I want our parents to raise the baby so long as they still live in Chicago, so long as they're under 75 when they start to act. My sister, so long as she's married. My brother, so long as he's not as long as he's not divorced. Thinking, I don't want a single person with 3 kids of their own having my 3 kids. It's just too much for one person to handle. So that's a vital document for anyone thinking about an estate plan.
Okay. Now, I mentioned healthcare and COVID-19, and we, in our family, we had my mother had a very difficult decision when my grandfather was hospitalized and he was on life support, and there was a difference of opinion between my mother and her sister as to what his wishes would be. He didn't have his wishes written down. What is the document where we would determine what we want to happen if we're incapacitated? What is that document called? And, when should they come to you to have that document drafted? Yeah,
and there are a few different documents that kind of come together to do this, but I think the main document that everyone over the age of 18 should have, and parents, this includes your kids going off to college, by the way. You don't get to just call their medical group in school and say, hey, I want to know about Susie's diagnosis. This is everyone over 18, and that's a healthcare power of attorney. So a healthcare power of attorney will allow someone else, once a condition is met, such as your doctor has affirmed you're no longer able to make decisions for yourself, it gives that right to do that to someone else. And if you have what's called a statutory power of attorney, meaning each state has usually decided their own language that they like to see in powers of attorney, and generally, just so you know, I recommend those because I think those are very familiar to doctors and emergency rooms. I don't want some document I drafted getting stuck in the legal department for a week. Well, we can't make your medical emergency decisions. So that's the document that I would recommend for everyone, where you can A, name someone else who will make medical decisions in your place, and B, give some amount of guidance to that person as to the decisions you'd like to make. You'll decide things like, is quality of life more important to me than the length versus staying alive is the most important thing to me. You can restrict their decision making. You can decide you never want blood transfusions. You have a lot of things that you can guide your agent to, decisions to make on your behalf.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit now about a trust, right? So there are different types of trusts, and for planning purposes, older people oftentimes will be counseled to put their assets in some sort of a trust. Why are people counseled to do that? How do you use trusts? What are the different types of trusts?
Yeah, I think generally trusts can be described in two different venues. There are two main types of trust. One is called a revocable living trust. And that's the one that most people should have. And, like I mentioned, here in Illinois, we know if someone A, owns real estate, or B, has assets over $100,000 that are not jointly owned or named a beneficiary, their estate will go through probate if they don't have a trust. A will does not avoid probate. A will is a lot like a revocable living trust in that it describes A, who should manage your affairs once you're gone, and B, who should inherit from you, rather than the state making those decisions. But a trust, if it owns your assets as it rightfully should, that's a funded trust, and that's what we want, then your estate can bypass probate. And so that's what most people need. And I think a lot of people don't, because it sounds very fancy, it sounds complicated, like it'll require a lot of maintenance, and they really don't. So, of the types of trusts, a revocable living trust is the most common, and that's what's generally recommended when people recommend having a trust at all.
Yeah, and one of the things that I really like about a trust and we'll get into this down the road, from an asset protection point of view, is a trust allows you to own an asset or multiple assets with some privacy, because you can name the trust. For example, a lot of people will own real estate in an LLC, and the LLC ownership will be a trust, and the trust name could be the address of the property. So 1450 Pine Street or whatever, 1450 Pine Street Trust, it doesn't really do anything other than protect the privacy, and allows you, if you die, somebody can immediately step in, and if the trust is the manager of that property, somebody can immediately step in and manage the property, right?
Right. And especially when you're considering people who own multiple properties or have an LLC or a series LLC, they'll usually utilize some structure like that to not hide assets. Revocable living trusts don't take those assets out of your own estate. They don't take them, it's all run through your own social security number or EIN if it's an LLC. But you're right, there's some element of privacy there. It's just harder to find you. So that's why a lot of people like them as well.
Well, and whenever I work with attorneys who deal with famous people, for example, one of the things we have them do is they always bring in a trust and estates attorney, and the famous person, if they're entering into a partnership, the partner is always the trust. We never have the famous person, and as long as it fits the asset structure that they're using, because we don't want, like, for example, well, I don't want to break any confidentiality, but there was a famous singer that his attorney was my client. And that famous singer is a prolific investor, and he makes more money these days with his investments than he does from his music catalog. But this singer, when he came to my client for IP, help, and I said, I'm looking at this portfolio that you have here for him and everything is in his name. There's a huge amount of exposure there. And he said, oh, you're right. He said, and he didn't want to go back and create, special purpose entities for each. Well, he would have, but he thought that the client would have said, that's a lot of work and it's going to cost a lot of money. And I don't know that it's really necessary. So what he did was he went to a trust and estates attorney. Trust and estates attorney created the trust, and we retitled all of the assets in the trust's name. Done. All of a sudden, his name disappears from the documents. Nothing changed, no material change. But I think, and this is the question that I have for you, he's better off because whoever is it's not the trustee, it's who's the person who takes over the trust when he dies. What is that? Is that the successor trustee? Immediately upon his death, if he's riding the tour bus and God forbid the tour bus goes down a hill and he passes away, the successor trustee immediately can begin making decisions on those assets, and there's no issue with it. So it's a really good strategy.
Well, that's a great story to highlight kind of some other aspects of estate planning. The privacy benefit is one of them. That's not always a concern for everyone. But for the people that are, definitely a cool maneuver.
So I want to talk to you about that, and I want to get into that, and I'll ask you a question, and I'll give you a minute to think about it, because I think this is your superpower. I think there are certain people who, before they do anything, should come to you and have this type of I would call it like an asset protection scheme, but let's call it a strategy because scheme has a negative connotation, right? Asset protection strategy. And I want to ask you some questions about that and particular types of people, particular professions. So I want to get into that in just a minute. Before we do, I need to remind folks that our show is brought to you by Sandrowski Corporate Advisors. For over 35 years, Sandrowski has been helping people all across the United States with a number of different things. One of my favorite things that Sandrowski does is business valuations. So let's say you want to buy a new business and you're doing your due diligence, and the person that you're buying the business from gives you all the financial information. And you're thinking to yourself, well, I know how to read these documents, but I'm not really sure that based on the financial spreadsheets that I'm seeing here, that I should really be paying this price, and I don't know how to make a counter offer. Well, that's a time to call Sandrowski Corporate Advisors, because what they'll do is they'll do a financial analysis on the business, they'll look at the market conditions, and they'll even look at some comparable businesses, and they'll tell you, well, here is the range that this business should go for based on our analysis, and then you can decide whether you make an offer at the low end of that range, at the high end of that range, or outside of the range altogether. This doesn't mean that Sandrowski is going to tell you, oh, you're overpaying for that business. They're just helping you make an educated decision. Another thing that Sandrowski Corporate Advisors can help you with is if you're an attorney, let's say, and you need some help digging into the finances of a case. You're handling a dispute between two partners over an asset. And the one partner says the asset is worth X, the other partner says the asset is worth Y. Sandrowski can get in there. They can look at the asset, determine the value of the asset from an accounting perspective using the generally accepted accounting principles, and they can give you an opinion. Now, why is that opinion important? Because if you're trying the case before a judge, the judge may want to hear from an expert. And here's the thing about Sandrowski. They have testified hundreds of times. Their CPAs, their experts have testified hundreds of times in court, and they can testify in a way that is down to earth, that is simple language, and make the most complex accounting so easy even a judge can understand it. If you need help with any of these issues, I want you to call 866-717-1607, 866-717-1607, Sandrowski Corporate Advisors. They're a CPA firm with a different perspective. We're also brought to you by My Revenue Roadmap Guide. So when I work with my clients and I'm helping them build their book of business, the first thing we do is we create a business development plan. If you need a business development plan, you shouldn't have to sit down and develop one from scratch. So I'm going to give you for free right now My Revenue Roadmap Guide. Here's what you do. Go to revenueroadmapguide.com, revenueroadmapguide.com, enter your contact info, you can download the same guide I use with my clients, and you can customize it for yourself. When I work with my clients, we sit down and we tinker with it. We work on it based on what my clients' strengths are. You can do the same thing at home. Revenue Roadmap Guide. Go there, download your free business development plan now. We're talking with Stephanie Sexauer. She's the attorney and founder of Sexauer Law. If you want to reach her, you can call her at 312-300-4743, 312-300-4743. All right, Stephanie. So I'm a doctor, let's say, and I'm in a high-risk field. Let's say I'm an anesthesiologist. I don't ever want an asset in my name, right? Because I'm a prime target. If something goes wrong, the first thing that's going to happen is, hey, listen, personal injury attorneys need to eat. Medical malpractice attorneys need to eat. So if something goes wrong, the first thing that's going to happen is me, and as an anesthesiologist, I'm going to get served. I'm going to get sued. So I don't really want any assets in my name. What do you do to help somebody like me?
Sure. So, what we're talking about now is we talked a little bit about revocable living trusts. Now we're talking about what are called irrevocable trusts, and they can be beneficial for different people for different reasons. One of them is this idea of creditor protection, asset protection. Generally, when someone's even thinking about doing an irrevocable trust, it's because their estate may be what's called taxable. In Illinois, for us, that's if someone's assets at death exceed $4 million per person or $8 million per couple. Federally, it's a lot higher. It's over $12 million per person, $24 million per couple. And some states don't even have estate taxes. Illinois is one of, I think, 12 that do. But for someone in Illinois, if they're thinking about an irrevocable trust, specifically for asset protection, and whether or not it has anything to do with estate tax or not, the benefit of that is that they can take an asset that they've earned and basically give it to someone else for someone else's benefit without it being subject to the lens of a creditor. So just, the benefit is exactly what you're saying. That if someone wanted to shield their assets from creditors, there is a way to do it. The disadvantage of irrevocable trust planning is that it really does give the asset to someone else. It's for someone else's exclusive benefit. You lose control of it, and you're not yourself supposed to benefit from it anymore. So, are there creative ways to do that? Yes. Do people really like to lose that flexibility? Not always. So, there's in any type of estate plan, if you're doing an irrevocable trust, you likely already have a revocable trust, and you'll just kind of work between the two to get to your comfort level. But certainly what you're suggesting is accomplishable.
Okay. So oftentimes we'll hear people say, I don't need that. I'm not in a high risk profession, right? My contention is always that if you're an entrepreneur, you're in a high risk profession because there's going to be, you deal with a lot of vendors. Perhaps you deal with, clients who, for whatever reason, the relationship goes sideways, and maybe through no fault of yours, but their uncle is an attorney, so they don't have to pay him, and he can sue you for whatever reason he wants. And these types of roles that people find themselves in, unless you're someone who is an employee of a large company, and even then, if you have any investment property, that should never be titled in your name, in my opinion. There should always be some sort of an asset protection strategy that you have. Talk about that for a minute. When people start to invest, let's say they invest in real estate, how does your estate plan, how is it impacted by, adding different types of assets like real estate to an estate plan? Sure.
So, I actually get this question a lot because a lot of people will, even if they're not active investment managers, they may own a property or two outside of their, actual residential home. I think a lot of people have the generally accepted notion that they've got property insurance, so they're protected. And yet we know that homeowners insurance would do anything they could to avoid paying out. So when we think about a scenario where you've got an all-state homeowners insurance policy, someone in a condo you own fell through the floor, died, if you weren't, on time every month paying your premiums, if you let the policy lapse, if for whatever reason you had signed something saying you would get the floors checked annually and you didn't, they're going to find a reason not to pay. And so where are the people going to, the family of the person who's passed away, who are they going to look to pay? It's going to be you. So anyone who owns real estate in an investment context, my suggestion is always to consider having at least an LLC who owns that property, and you can be the member manager of the LLC. But what that means is that if the LLC owns the property, then the family who's suing for the negligence or, wrongful death of their loved one, generally all they can take is the value of what's in that LLC, which would hopefully just be that one property. And if you have multiple properties, you might want to consider having a series LLC, where each of those properties are in their own series, where they're all tied under kind of one umbrella, and you can assign the interest in the LLC to your trust, revocable or irrevocable, meaning that you as the trustee of the trust are still able to manage that asset, and the asset upon your death still passes to the people you intended it to.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent strategy. The other thing that I talk to entrepreneurs about all the time, and it tends to be an eye-opening experience for them and for a lot of attorneys, Stephanie. So I'm curious to hear what your opinion is of this. There are assets in your business that should have separate ownership from the actual business itself. For example, if you have an intellectual property portfolio, so your trademarks, anything that you have copyright protection on, patents, for example, all of those things, if your business is sued and it goes into bankruptcy, those assets will be subject to assignment or perhaps a sale. So those things should be owned by a separate company, or that company should be owned by a trust so that those assets are insulated, they're protected. It does a couple of different things for you. The first thing it does is it protects you from, creditors. The second thing it does is it keeps those assets separate. So when people value the business, we were just talking about Sandrowski valuing things. They value the IP if it's in a separate entity completely separately from the business. So I could sell my business to Stephanie. I keep my IP, and then I can sell my patent to somebody else if I want. What is your experience? Is this something that is this common knowledge? Like, do most entrepreneurs do this, or is this something they just completely ignore?
Well, I think that, the much more sophisticated business owners will usually surround themselves with enough experienced professionals where they'll at least start having conversations like this. If someone's had a sophisticated enough idea, strategy, whatever, that warrants them having a patent, a copyright, then they probably have thought about this or are being advised to do it. But I'm a small business owner. I have a small law firm. I haven't even myself done that kind of what I think is pretty serious planning. But I also don't know that there's anything. I haven't had a brilliant idea all of my own that's worthy of a patent. I'm sure different business owners will handle this differently. But I'm glad that you're even bringing it up, to be honest.
Well, so take this podcast, for example. There are a lot of people out there who start out doing a podcast as a way to promote their own business. And then the next thing you know, the podcast takes on a life of their own. I know 5 different people who were either consultants or coaches, and they were doing a podcast for business development purposes. And the podcast ended up throwing off enough monthly income where they could make the decision to just exclusively work on making videos and doing a podcast. Well, all of a sudden, all of the intellectual property that surrounds each episode, that surrounds the name of the show, that, the logo has to be trademarked and protected. And now you've purchased all of the equipment, this microphone, the cameras, you purchased everything through your company. Well, all those assets, if you're going to do that, have to be moved over to that new entity. And now you've got the business that you're actually promoting by doing the show, and you've also got the show that's separate. So if Spotify comes to you like they did with Joe Rogan and they say, I want to give you $100 million to be exclusively on my show, you're not going to sell them your life coaching business in addition to your podcast. so you don't have to go through the hassle of separating the two, right? Now, think about a more conventional business. Think about the corporate cleaning company, let's say. And the corporate cleaning company has a side business where they do rugs in homes, but, during the week on the overnight shift, they're out buffing floors in office buildings and stuff. But on the weekends, they're doing carpets at home. Well, the carpet cleaners in the local neighborhood want to buy that aspect of the business out, and it's not separated. It's not a separate. It's not a completely separate entity. It just makes sense if you have different lines of business or different types of assets to protect them and to title them separately.
Oh yeah, and I think, Dave, that brings up a really good point for especially people who are partners in a business. One of the partners may have an idea spawned from the original business, and they'll probably want to make sure that the second idea that forms the second business is completely separate from the company they've been working on with their partner. For the exact reason I think you're bringing up, that it's much easier to separate when no one else gets to claim ownership to it.
Well, that's a great point. And then talk about the benefits of taking, I don't want to be gender insensitive, but key person insurance in a company, right? Sophisticated people will go out and they'll get this key person insurance. So you and I are partners in a business, and we have a convenience store. And I say to you, hey, Stephanie, listen, if something happens to you, I want to be able to pay out your heirs so that I'm not partners with your significant other in the business. I wanted to be a partner with you. Same thing with you. You didn't want to be a partner with my wife. You wanted to be a partner with me. So in order to make that payout happen, we need to have a buy-sell agreement, and we also need, key person insurance. One of the steps I think they miss, and you can tell us if this is a good idea and you can tell us how it works, is you could make the beneficiary of the insurance policy a trust, and then the successor trustee could essentially be, the other person in the business, and then that person can then, through the buy-sell agreement, buy the other partner out without ever having to, worry about probate or any of that other stuff. There's no contentious issue. The wife or the husband or the spouse, the significant other, doesn't get to come in and say, no, I always wanted to own the convenience store, Talk about that a little bit.
Well, I think you're spot on. The whole point of key man insurance policies is this idea that at death there needs to be this liquidity in order to buy out the family so that the family doesn't actually take any ownership rights. They don't want that. They want the value. They want the money that the company was worth, and the surviving business partner wants the stock, the shares, the ownership. They want to move on and work on the business, but the family needs to be compensated, and that's where the key person insurance comes in, which I think is a great idea. And I do know that, enough advisors, I think these days, have at least heard of this, idea to make it a little more widely known. But yet a lot of business owners will come to me and it hasn't been done yet. So, and I think they're even still a little hesitant to do it, pull the plug on another policy, another premium,
Well, and do you know who the worst are at this, Stephanie? I'll give you a hint. Who do you think are the worst at this?
I'll tell you what, the worst planners I think of all time are lawyers.
100%.
I do a lot of probate, and I do a lot of estate plans for other lawyers, and I'm like, you're 50 years old. You haven't done this yet? You've got kids in their 20s. What's going on?
Yeah, 100%. Every time I work with two partners, I say, "Let me see the partnership agreement," and then I get blank stares. Or I say, let me see your key person policy. Let me see your buy-sell agreement. That should be an addendum to your partnership agreement, and I get blank stares. And I say to them, what would be the first thing you would tell, a client, you would tell your sister, your brother, if they were buying a business with a partner? What would be the first thing you would tell them? Well, you got to have a partnership agreement. You got to have a buy-sell agreement in case, in the event of the untimely demise of the other person. Never. They never have. I worked with two of my dear friends who I worked with for years. They both carried the partnership agreement around in their briefcase for like 7 or 8 months before they marked it up and then eventually signed it. And it was, and this is something that I'd like you to address before we wrap up tonight. It's the I guess it's the aspect of finality that really prevents people from wanting to have this conversation with you in the first place. So help everyone who's listening, help everyone who's watching. Stephanie, how do we bring this up? Do we use the asset protection angle? Do we use the, hey, you want to travel and you want to do it carefree and not worry about the guardianship for your kids angle? What are some of the best ways that you've seen people bring up, hey, you got to go get your affairs in order. You got to go get your estate plan taken care of.
I hate to say this, that it has to be some kind of inciting incident to cause someone to get a estate plan has to be negative. But in all honesty, I think it is. I think it's when your best friend is diagnosed with cancer, had a heart attack and died. Your parents died. You've gone through probate. You see how bad it is. You don't want your kids to go through it. COVID was a huge. I think it initiated a lot of people for the first time ever to really think about their own mortality. That doesn't mean to say this is a fun process. It's totally morbid. It's awful to actually think about what will happen to you when you die. But I do think there's such a peacefulness, there's a calmness that you can gift to your family and gift to yourself, that at least, all the T's are crossed, I's are dotted, everything's in order, and it truly does feel good when it's done.
Think about it. If you go on vacation and somebody's house sitting, you leave them a checklist of things that they should do while you're away, right? I go out for the night with my wife, and we leave the kids at home with the dogs and, the babysitter, and we give her like 15 phone numbers. We tell her exactly where we're going to be. We tell her what to feed the dogs, the exact amount, what time to take them out for their walk, what time the kids have to go. There's like a sheet of paper and and the back sheet and the backside of things just for us to go out for 5 hours. People, you're planning this thoroughly for stuff like that, but you're not planning for the most important time, and that's when you're not around to tell people what you want and how you want things done. All right, Stephanie, I want you to give folks, I think this was a great session. We gave folks a lot of ideas. I want you to give them 3 main things they should take away. So I want you to think about 3 things they should take away from our conversation. Before you do that, I want to remind people that we are brought to you by Sandrowski Corporate Advisors. For over 35 years, they've helped people with sophisticated accounting issues. If you need help with forensic accounting, with dispute advisory, with business valuation, litigation support, forensic accounting, give them a call. You can reach them at 866-717-1607, 866-717-1607. We're also brought to you by my Revenue Roadmap Guide. You need a business development plan. You want to use relationship-based business development strategies. Go to revenueroadmapguide.com. Download your free copy today. It's your business development plan. You can customize it. It's my gift to you for listening and for watching. Our guest today is Stephanie Sexauer. She's an estate planning attorney, a trust and estates attorney based in Chicago. If you want to reach her, you can call 312-300-4743, 312-300-4743. I'm also going to put her email address and her website down in the show notes. You can click on the website link there and go see her website. You can click on the link to email her down in the show notes as well. All right, Stephanie, what are the 3 things we should take away from our time together today?
Thanks, Dave, and this has been so great. I think number 1, anyone over the age of 18 should have powers of attorney for healthcare and property. This includes your kids that went to college. Just make sure it's done. Spouses don't automatically bypass HIPAA. You, just as a parent, do not get to call and check in on your kid's mono diagnosis when they're 19. Second, a will is not equal to a trust. Just because you have a will, that is not enough. You should likely have a trust. Talk to your estate planning attorney about that. Number 3, we didn't really we really didn't address this too much tonight, but it's a reminder that so much of our population these days is in the baby boomer generation. We will have a lot, and we do have a lot of aging people. Check in on your neighbors, especially your single neighbors. There is a lot of scamming going on, a lot of financial exploitation, a lot of neglect. Just do your best, check on people, do good in the world.
All right, yeah, let's spend a couple of minutes talking about that. So, I regularly spend, and she's probably going to listen to this, so I don't want to go into too much detail, but there's a member of my family that I regularly spend a significant amount of time each week talking through the latest phone call, email, link that they clicked on. And, older people in particular are vulnerable. And I think one of the things that you brought up just now about people checking on them, that, what we do, for example, is my kids I have a teenager and I have a 10-year-old. And I will regularly send my teenager to the older folks in our family and have him show them, where they should go on the internet, what they should do, where they should not put private information. The internet is constantly changing, and there's a new scam every day. Like Facebook, for example, Facebook Messenger. We had this happen to a member of our family where their Facebook page was cloned, and the person was messaging other people to send them money because they had been frozen out of their bank account and they needed to pay bills right away, and they were going to pay them back next week. And somebody called me and said, hey, so-and-so, is on Facebook asking people for money. And I called the person and I said, what are you asking people for money for? And they're like, I don't know what you're talking about. And that's exactly what happened. When you say, talk to the older people and check in on them, is that the kind of thing you're referring to, or are you referring to in-person scams as well?
Well, Dave, I think you highlighted one of the really common ones that a lot of us are guilty of. We're getting sent emails that look very legitimate these days. We're getting messages from people we think we know, and you're getting links, and it's a terrible world we're living in with all of these fishers, scammers. God knows what they're doing with our information. Yes, of course, cautioning seniors to be careful is one thing, but I think there is, there's the idea that we should still visit with seniors, not just for the potential for them to be scammed in person, but really, are we making sure that they're living life the way they should? Are we making sure they have the groceries they need? Are they getting up and exercising at all? Are they making their way to the store, having any amount of human interaction? Just really making sure they're living their best lives in the twilight of time. I think that's an important aspect of aging too. And that's kind of our job is the younger generation.
I couldn't agree with you more. One of the conversations that I've had with my parents, I'm very fortunate. My parents are in their 80s and they're still really sharp. And one of the conversations I had with them is, look, you've gotten, this is, we need to be careful about sharing COVID-19 information because, the powers that be where this podcast is distributed, there's a significant amount of censorship related to that subject, and it could be we've had episodes pulled down for joking around. So I'm not joking when I say I told my parents, you got your vaccines, you got your boosters, you follow all the safety protocols. You're 85 years old. My mother's 83 years old. I want you to go out and hang out with other people. I don't want you to stay in the house any longer because you've been in the house now for, when I had this conversation with them, it was 18 months. And, things had started to open up. And I said, you're wearing a mask. You're fully vaccinated. You're going to meet somebody outside for coffee. Perfect. It's safe. Go play cards. Go talk. Go volunteer at church. Go ahead. It's okay. Because here's the thing, and you're so right, that 6 months of no contact with the outside world is more harmful to them than, a mild illness would be, knock on wood, if they got some sort of a mild illness, right? So I think you're spot on. And the one thing we should do, we spend so much time telling older people, oh, you got to be careful of this, you got to be careful of that. We should be encouraging them to do more stuff. We should be encouraging them to be more active. I think I'm so glad you added that to the 3 things, because I think that is a really, really important point. It's amazing. I think, we're just lucky, but I think my parents, because they are active and they're in a community where they have something to do every day, I think that's why they're still sharp and they're still with it. I see people who, the minute they retire, they start to decline because they stop doing everything.
And they're so lonely. Yeah. I think that's, and Dave, we really, none of us know how much time we have. So it's a good reminder, it's warming. It's hopefully about to start warming up here in Chicago. We're all going to be able to get out a little bit more. Hopefully in Florida, things, they're already that way. You guys are the lucky ducks anyway. But it's a good reminder. Let's get out when we can. Be safe, be careful, but let's, just watch ourselves. And that's going to be what makes the world go round.
All right, Stephanie, it was a pleasure having you with us today. You can call Stephanie for your estate plan or just for good advice about staying active in your elder years. You can call her at 312-300-4743, 300-300-4743. Stephanie, it was a pleasure having you with us today. Thanks for joining us.
Yeah, Dave, thank you so much.
All right, folks, that'll do it for this episode of the Inside BS Show. I'm Dave Lorenzo. Until tomorrow, here's hoping you make a great living and live a great life.